So it's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker today, who is Ashley Cooke, lead curator of Antiquities, at World Museum Liverpool. Ashley, if you'd like to just say hello to confirm we can hear you.
Hi, hello. I hope you can.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. And if you would like to share your screen while I introduce you, and then I will hand over. So Ashley Cooke is lead curator of Antiquities at World Museum Liverpool. He's worked in museums for over 20 years and has over a decade of fieldwork experience working at 5 archaeological sites across Egypt. In 2006, he graduated from the University of Liverpool with a PhD in Egyptology. And in the same year, he was appointed curator of Egyptian and Near Eastern Antiquities at World Museum, which is part of National Museums Liverpool. He's now lead curator of Antiquities and in charge of collections from the ancient world, including some 20,000 objects from Egypt and Sudan. He's on Twitter at Egypt Curator, and his talk today is going to be called Rising from the Ashes, How the Wellcome Collection Came to the Aid of Liverpool's War-Torn Museum. Over to you, Ashley.
Thank you, Ruth. Hello, everyone. It's lovely to join you, to be beamed into all your homes and offices around the country and further afield. Thank you, Ruth. Thank you, Ken, as well, for this invite. And I'd also like to thank all of the team at Swansea that are working with you to digitise all the auction catalogues. They've been invaluable help for me now for over a year. I'd also like to thank Alexandra, Ruth, and everyone else at the Wellcome on the transcribed Wellcome project, which has also helped me enormously. And a lot of that work will be on display for you all in this presentation. So I'm joining you from Liverpool. I'm actually in my boss's office, so I'm hoping she doesn't walk in and catch me. It's just because the Wi-Fi is a lot stronger here, I've discovered. But let's move on. So I'm going to be talking about Rising from the Ashes, really about this collection where I am today. Liverpool went through some serious troubles in the Second World War, and the Wellcome Collection came in 1971 and was enormously we were enormously grateful for receiving this collection, and it's an honour to be talking about it. A little brief introduction to World Museum. We've gone by various names over the years: the Derby Museum, the Mayor Museum, Merseyside County Museum, the Free Liverpool Public Museums, Liverpool Museum, and now World Museum. I'm sure we'll change again in the future, I'm not sure. But anyway, we are part of a group of museums in Liverpool called National Museums Liverpool. So we're a national museum, and we're the oldest of this group. We go back to 1851 when the 13th Earl of Derby donated an enormous collection of natural history. And in about 1867, we were overwhelmingly a museum of science, natural history. But 1867, everything changed overnight with the donation of Joseph Mayer's collection of antiquities, anthropology, decorative arts, and I'll be talking about that to give you a bit of background. Anyhow, we are open, all our museums and galleries are open, so I do encourage you to visit Liverpool if you can. Our Egyptian galleries, they are beautiful, I would say that, but they feature nearly 100 Wellcome objects. And whilst you're here, visit our temporary exhibition, Artificial Intelligence, More Than Human. And then the adjoining gallery, the Walker Art Gallery, has an exhibition that opens tomorrow. And it's just got 5-star reviews in The Guardian about the artist Sickler. So do visit. The 3rd of May 1941, this is when an incendiary device landed on the adjoining library, and the fire spread through to the museum and moved its way through the Egyptian galleries and took away about 3,000 objects from the Egyptian and Nubian collections. At the outbreak of war in 1939, the museum did close for 2 weeks, and staff were trained in how to put out fires, and also collections were evacuated. So material was deposited in Martin's Bank, in the safes in the basement there, along with a significant amount of the gold reserve from the Bank of England that was moved there secretly. Also, material was sent to Wales, sent to Mostyn Hall, particularly the Egyptian collections. This is where a lot of the smaller material was sent. But the galleries reopened after 2 weeks, and a lot of the Egyptian material was left on display. So this is the larger material. Sculpture had been sandbagged, but coffins and stele were left on open display in their showcases, thinking that would protect them and that staff would be able to put out any fire. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case, and a lot of the collection was destroyed, but also very much damaged. It wasn't until 1971 that an Egyptian gallery opened in the museum. The museum was pretty much derelict for over 20 years. And this new gallery was the work of one of my predecessors, Dr. Dorothy Downs, who you can see here in this newspaper story. And you can see an image of the gallery there in the 1980s. And if you look closer, you can make out a welcome object, this brightly painted coffin fragment from the floor of a 21st, 22nd dynasty coffin. Most of our welcome collection, the material that we have, is about 3,500 items, starts with the prefix 1973 for the accession number. But you'll notice this one has 1978. I'm going to just go on to this slide to illustrate the kind of work that we've been doing with the collections. Thanks to help from the Wellcome, thanks to help from Swansea, is access to so many auction catalogues and being able to trace, thanks to annotations from Anthony Donahue, Wellcome numbers when he was aware that this is an item that Wellcome purchased. So this object here, 1978, is a number that was assigned in the late 70s to collections that we couldn't trace provenance. So it's only very recently that we've been able to track this down to Franklin Hood's collection, and that's all through assistance provided by Ken and the Wellcome. And it's just so important to give provenance to objects. It's one of my interests, is objects become so much more interesting if you can talk about how they're acquired, who they came from, for not only for academics but for the visitor. And the transcribed Wellcome project is amazing. That been digitizing all these flimsies, these index cards for the Wellcome collection, and the work that we've been doing with some of this material that we weren't sure exactly where it's from. It's quite understandable that that these things happen in museum collections. Quite a few curators have been quite open about some of the problems with documentation. And ours is not just because of a Second World War getting in the way of progress for the museum, but also just the huge efforts that were made after the war to acquire collections. So between 1942 and 1980, the collections increased by 11,000 from over 100 sources. And you can see the Wellcome here came to us in 1971, but also in 1980, there was further distribution of antiquities, not just Egyptian, but also to the Greek-Roman collections. And I should also add as well that large amounts of anthropological collections were donated to the museum in the 1950s as well, to our separate globalization department. What was lost? Well, we've got a pretty good idea of what was lost, thanks to Percy Newberry and Eric Peat, who were Brunner Professors of Egyptology at the University of Liverpool. They were pretty much consulting curators in the early 1900s for the museum. They not only catalogued the collection, but they arranged displays and published catalogues. So we have really good records, actually, for a lot of the objects that were in the collection before 1941, whether they're still with us or not. Unfortunately, lots were lost. I tend to refer to them as ghosts because they still exist. We have the record cards, and for some objects we have illustrations, a lot of these from 1839, and we also have some photographs as well from the 1920s and 30s. Slightly rarer to have photographs of the objects. And some of these objects here have been published as well in more recent times, such as there's two there I can see that have been published by Aidan Dodson. So they're very much part of the collection that I curate. People still inquire about them. They're still important, even though physically we can't display them. Although in the gallery now, we do have displays using these images to create some presence of these ghosts, as I call them, in the gallery. I could go through lots of details, but I'll have to speed up. But, you know, 77 stelae were lost. There was one showcase 27, where 26 stelae were all destroyed, including 2 examples here. The only one to have survived was a wooden stele, which was removed at the outbreak of war, because it was wooden material, wooden stele, smaller things that they thought was more vulnerable to fire. There was a salvage campaign, so got examples of stele that were dragged out of the building. Limestone, sandstone did not fare well in fire, but granite, you can see this lovely granite stele here, Middle Kingdom piece, and you can see the back of it here in 1941, and then this recent image of stele on display, fairly intact. You could hardly know it had been in a fire. What was in the museum at that time, in 1941? There was around 7,000 items. And I'm just going to go through now how this collection was built. The first donation was less than 10 years after the museum had opened. It was 1861, a small amount of material, 7 items from William Crossfield. These were the first Egyptian items to enter the building that I'm in today. But the origins, really, of our collection go back much further. They go back to a man called Joseph Mayer, and he had his own separate museum in Liverpool that opened in 1852. He donated his collection to us in 1867. You can see this giant leap here. And it just, as I say, transformed the museum pretty much overnight. The museum had to extend before it could accommodate this huge collection. Mayer's Museum, on Colquitt Street, another victim of the Blitz. It's no longer there, and it's now a pub, so you can actually have a nice beer or whatever drink you prefer, and contemplate the antiquities that were once in this place. There's got 2 images here to guide your imagination. We have these 2 illustrations of 2 of the rooms in the museum. There's a poster for the museum there, and there's a lovely portrait of Mayer, which hangs on the wall of the Walker Art Gallery, the sister art gallery next door. Mayer wasn't an archaeologist. He was buying from people that were collecting on their visits to Egypt. His first collection came from a man called Joseph Sams, and this was in 1850. He purchased his collection. Sams had visited Egypt earlier on in the 1830s, but was also buying from auctions and building up a collection that he could offer for sale to the British Museum. They bought one collection, and Joseph Mayer bought another collection. And there's a lovely catalogue from 1839 that illustrates many of the pieces. The second collection he bought was from George Annesley, Viscount Valentia, some of you may know him. And these contained larger pieces, actual sculptural pieces, that were in the family home in Arley Castle on the border of Worcestershire and Staffordshire, since demolished, but I went there recently this summer with my family. Beautiful place to visit. It was quite interesting to think about these objects there, and Mayer's visit in 1852 to the auction in the castle. The third significant collection was the Reverend Henry Stobart. He visited Egypt a number of occasions to essentially accompany noblemen visiting Egypt and sharing his experience and knowledge. He purchased items such as the Ramesses girdle, the Stobart astronomical tablets, and Papyrus Mayer B. There's 2 more papyrus. So these eponymous objects, 3 individuals. This was acquired by Joseph Mayer in 1857. Now, the next group of materials, more of a steady growth of the collections between 1884 and 1915, where we see nearly 3,000 objects enter the collection. And this is through a new system, a new source of collecting that Alice Stevenson calls these excavated artifacts. There's a great quote from here from Alice about what is an excavated artifact. Well, it's an object whose value was created through the development of new sets of relationships between dig sites, institutions, and individuals. And this was originally the Egypt Exploration Fund, now Society, still with us, and one of the founders there, Amelia Edwards. And then later on, Flinders Petrie set up his own Egyptian research account, later the British School of Archaeology in Egypt. He trained students, he took them out, and one of those students he took out with him was John Garstang. And John Garstang quickly moved on from Petrie and set up his own excavation committees, and later the Liverpool Institute of Archaeology in 1904, which is now the Departments of Archaeology, Classics and Egyptology at the nearby University of Liverpool. So this was a new system of division of finds where material was allowed out of Egypt to go to other places around the world. And we've been seeing evidence of that in previous talks. I want to illustrate the kind of sites they were working at. You can see at the beginning these delta sites in the early 1880s. And Liverpool first subscribed to excavations at Tanis, and right the way down to Haraga in 1914. But I just want to illustrate this graph to show you how much was lost, actually. So we have the green representing objects that survived, but blue representing what was destroyed. A lot of the material that was destroyed was pottery, and I'll get on to that in a moment. But you can see sites such as Diospolis Parva. So this is several cemeteries between Abadia and Hu. And you can see it's almost 50-50, and that's pretty much all of the pottery lost, and the rest jewellery and smaller finds. So these join these ghosts in the collection. It's not just the mayor's collection that was salvaged by the fire. It was also material from Egypt Exploration Society, which is full of archaeology in Egypt, etc. And they just survived, say, in publications by, so this stele here, looking at this from Daryl Bakri, that published by the EES, and then the record cards as well. And so some of these ghosts literally stare at you with their tongue out. And move on now to 1914 to 1913. You can see there's not really much growth at all, just 102 acquisitions in this period. And, you know, the First World War obviously got in the way there, but afterwards, Liverpool really just didn't pick up with sponsoring excavations. They missed out on all of these excavations, in particular, really, Amana, the return to Bylas, Armand, Mustigada, and I'm pretty grateful that they didn't, because most of that material would have been destroyed. And this was because the curators at the time, Dr. Clubb, Mr. Entwistle, I don't think they were really keen on these excavated artifacts, as Alice calls them. Indeed, they are some of the people that would write back to the Egypt Exploration Fund and say, oh, you know, I think you've made a mistake. You sent us lots of broken pottery. Anyhow, in 1908, they were actually using the Egyptian collections in exchange with Santa Cruz Museum to gain material from there, and Otago Museum in New Zealand as well in 1914. Large amounts of Egyptian material, including that lovely Soul House from the Rifi excavations. That's the only one to survive. The remainder, I think 8 left here, were all destroyed. So I'm just really thankful that some of this material was dispersed. Anyhow, there's a growth after 1931, and this is all pretty much down to the new curator coming in, Miss Elaine Tankard, a really inspiring figure for me. She trained in archaeology, classical archaeology, and she had lots of contacts with archaeologists from the Institute of Archaeology and the British School in Athens. She subscribed, well, the museum subscribed with her advice to EES Armand excavations, but unfortunately all of those were destroyed, at least 337 items, and they hadn't been catalogued properly as well. They hadn't been seen by Professor Pete. So we did miss out on material from Amana, Armand, and this is how the Wellcome has really helped this museum. So the Wellcome Collection that came to us in 1971 contained lots of material from Amana, lots of pottery, including all of these fragments from one vessel, from House P 46.14. And there's a lovely summary here by the excavator, a good middle-class house of a fairly normal type of courtyard. Certainly this kind of house that could have these lovely, large painted amphora. And we put that together back in 2008. You can see volunteers and staff here going through these fragments. And the amphora is still on display in the museum. And more recently, I've been going through all the other sherds that come under different numbers and establishing at least 100 different vessels there. Material from Armand, about 100 ceramics, but also faunal material. And what's really great, though, about the distribution of the collection, I think, really, is that researchers have access to this material. And particularly through museums putting collections online, it just opens up this material, encourages researchers, such as an example here, Dr. Aaron de Souza from the University of Vienna, to come and work with this collection and also link it up together with the archives kept in the Egypt Exploration Society, who I need to thank as well for their assistance with the work we've been doing to document our collections. I'm just going to go now to the rebuilding of the collection, and I could tell you lots of stories about how the Wellcome helped us, but I need to be focused because we've got 10 minutes, and I just want to zoom in on Elaine Tankard's letter here to Brian Emery. So Brian Emery, you know, UCL, the Petrie as well, at this hub as well for redistribution later on. But she's mentioning it to him here. All the stacks of pottery from Hierakonpolis, Esna, Beni Hassan were lost in the Blitz. And now we have very little Egyptian material, having lost half of our exhibited collections and all of the large specimens. So I just want to end by focusing on the material we lost from the Institute of Archaeology Excavation, John Garstang. And I should really say Harold Jones as well, because when you start going through the archive, you realise poor Harold was lumbered with most of the work. And you can see the two here. It's a great illustration as well, because when you go through the archives that are in the Garstang Museum of Archaeology, which has just recently reopened as well, so if you are in Liverpool, you can visit there as well, you get this lovely idea of the excavations. They're nothing at all like the images you get from, say, Noel Rawnsley's account of working with Petrie, where, you know, eating tins of tongue and other kind of meats. You see Garstang enjoying tea, cake, and also playing golf, and generally enjoying himself. So I think, I probably would rather have worked with Garstang. Anyhow, his excavations committed. This is how he operated. It was by a group of funders, typically giving about £100 a year, usually about 10 of them, but they would also include others, such as the auditor, in this example, Griswold, who would be given a smaller division of fines. And perhaps Harold Jones, I need to look into that further, but also Garstang himself will take his share. At the end of the year, what was allowed to be distributed, and if you imagine that this is the early 1900s, so this is a time when we have Gaston Maspero in his, his second tenure as head of the Antiquities Service, and he was particularly keen for excavators to export whatever material he didn't want to keep for Egypt. So large amounts of material were being exported. And when they got back to England, they would be, just like Petrie would do, the EES would do, there would be these annual exhibitions, some in London, but some, such as this example, this illustration from a newspaper, was from the very museum I'm in. It was actually the gallery above my head. And some of the material in this illustration is on display upstairs. I can't go through all of this, but just give you just an idea. We have in the museum archives that refer to the divisions. And you can just see, I've just put the last four of the divisions here, division 7 to 8. We've got Lady Amherst, William McGregor, Jesse Howard, Francis Danton. And you can see how Garstang is trying to distribute similar things to people. So everyone seemed to get like a lapis lazuli facsimile, a replica figure here. Everyone seemed to get a model of a granary, and everyone got at least 3 Greek stone altars from Esna. And of that material that the museum received between 1904 and 1906, so it's about 718 objects, 359 we know were destroyed. But we also have to remember as well that members of the committee were also loaning their objects to the museum for display, including the Institute of Archaeology. So a lot of their collection, which doesn't figure in those these tables, was destroyed as well, such as this lovely granary model. Indeed, it was a complete tomb set that was destroyed. Material that we had between 1904 and 1906 came from 7 excavation sites, so 350 items destroyed from Bylas, Beni Hassan, Edfu, Esna, Hierakonpolis. Hestea, a site perhaps many of you not too familiar with, between Edfu and Aswan really, and Masewea, which is just very near to Esna. Wellcome was not a member of the Egyptian committees. He was a member later on of the Sudan committee that excavated the Meroe, but he was buying at auction. So his collection contains material via these other committee members that were later on, their families or themselves, were selling off their collections. So, for example, we have Hilton Price in 1911. We have Martin Cowell's collection in 1912. Lady Amherst's collection comes up for sale in 1921, Ralph Brocklebank, 1922, William McGregor, 1922 as well. And it's actually the McGregor collection with a lot of our material from Liverpool excavations represented in the Wellcome collection comes from. We have at least 31 items from Esner that come from the Wellcome collection. 30 of these you can see are from McGregor. 25 from Beni Hassan, again the bulk coming from McGregor, but also 5 from the Hilton Price collection, and then 10 from Bylas. Again the bulk, 8 McGregor, 2 from Brocklebank, another member of Garstang's excavation committees. A lot of them just exist as record cards. So much was destroyed, and the way the Wellcome collection has helped our collection is that we can see items that were destroyed, groups of items such as best jars. I just love this one. How can I not resist a comparison with Zachary Quinto in spot for you all there from this illustration? More best jars came back to us. They came back particularly from McGregor's collection. So we have this example here broken, but we still have all the pieces from Esner Excavations. And also a much finer example, one of the favourites actually on display upstairs from the Hilton Price collection. What the beauty of the Wellcome collection coming to us is that we could reunite tomb groups as well. So here we have 2 items from Wellcome, and we have one that was saved in the museum from the 1905 acquisition. And you can see here archived image of them put together. Now, one of my predecessors, Dorothy Downs, she would have loved this project because in her day, in the 1970s, she was having to write to so many curators and around museums asking if they had Esner material. She was trying to bring it all together in this book. So it just shows how we can progress now, how much easier it is. You can sit literally in your armchair and contact hundreds of museums and also delve into online collections and find material that was dispersed. This offering tray came to us from the Wellcome, and we can trace this back to Foster's 1920. I can't go back any further than that, so if anyone else can help me. The all-important number, 37E, is indicative of that it comes from Esner 37E 1905, and it came to Liverpool, and we can reunite it with this tomb group of beads, but also it replaces another jar that was lost in the fire. We just have a drawing of that jar there. Close up of those beads, and also details of the Excavation Archives. I think really the work of Garstang's assistant rather than himself, but you can just see some of the beads here, and they feature in the illustration. And we can see actually this is a typical shaft tomb with kind of 4 chambers coming off it. And the excavations of tomb 37, they went on for a month going in the different chambers, but you can track the material, which chambers it comes from. The Wellcome collection gave whole tomb groups, so 289, we'd lost a jar from there, but other jars came back to us. And just a quick note on object marks as well. I think we can follow this up later on, but just other curators to look out for the way that Garstang was marking material. Pottery, a lot easier to spot, but alabaster, they seem reluctant to mark this in paint, in ink, and it's usually in pencil. And it's usually obscured as well, in our instance, by the accession number. And you can just make out there McGregor's own private number. And ending now with a Bylas, you can just see in the archive that pencil number a lot clearer in that image there, but you can just make it out here on this item. And this is from Ralph Brocklebank's division. Brocklebank family created wealth from shipping and railways. He was a sponsor for 1 or 2 of Garstang's excavations. And you can just see the auction number there. That's how we can track it to lot 99 in the 1922 sale at Christie's. The McGregor collection, really quite obvious labels. You know, this piece, this jar here is formed from 3 elements, and they've put labels on each. And this is what we're doing. This is the kind of sharing of this information, thanks to Ken and everyone at the Wellcome, adding it onto this database where we can track where the objects are now. And I'll just end there, and thank you all for your patience, for listening to me. Do contact me on my email if you have any questions about what I've spoken about. As Ruth mentioned, I'm also on Twitter as well.
Thank you so much, Ashley. I think what I loved about your presentation was showing the real complexity of navigating through the distribution of finds and the distribution of collections by collectors and Wellcome. So thank you so much for that.